What happens when a powerful black CEO is denied her rightful first-class seat by a woman who assumes she doesn't belong on Flight 812 from Boston to Atlanta? Elena Carter faces a moment that millions endure silently, everyday, casual, and cruel discrimination disguised as standards. But this time, the stakes are higher. Who holds the real power when the system meant to protect fairness is weaponized by bias? Will Elena's quiet strength be enough to turn humiliation into a catalyst for change? And how far will the ripple effects reach inside the cabin, across social media, and into corporate boardrooms? This is a story about more than one seat on a plane. It's about dignity, resilience, and the everyday battles against systemic injustice that too many face without a voice. Elena's calm defiance reveals uncomfortable truths and challenges us all to ask, what would you do if you were in her shoes? Would you speak up or stay silent? And how do we confront our own biases before it's too late? If you're ready to witness a powerful journey of courage and justice, hit like, share this story, and subscribe for more real stories that make you think and feel. Let's begin. Elena Carter stepped through the jet bridge and into the first-class cabin of Flight 812, her black leather satchel hanging loosely over one shoulder and a lightweight charcoal blazer draped over her arm. The soft hum of the airplane's engines blended with muted conversations and the faint clinking of glassware from the nearby galley. The air smelled faintly of polished leather and a hint of citrus from the cleaning agents. The burgundy carpet beneath her feet was plush and familiar. This flight from Boston to Atlanta was one she had taken countless times over the past decade. It was a ritual almost as steady and comforting as her morning espresso. She paused briefly at row 4, her gaze flicking to the boarding pass she held carefully in one hand. Seat 4A, window seat, exactly where she had requested, and exactly where she belonged. But as she reached for the armrest, her eyes caught something that caused her to freeze. There, spread across her seat, was a bright orange designer handbag too large and too prominent to ignore. The woman occupying the adjacent seat, a white woman in her early 50s dressed in a cream-colored pantsuit that whispered of privilege, looked up from her phone with an expression that mixed mild annoyance and the quiet assumption of superiority. Her eyes swept over Elena's casual outfit, khaki trousers, and a soft white blouse, before returning to the bag that claimed the seat Elena was meant to occupy. "Excuse me," Elena said softly, her voice steady but polite. "This is my seat." The woman's lips curled into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I don't think so, sweetheart," she replied, the word carrying the syrupy tone people often reserve for children who are being corrected. "People like you don't sit here." The words hung in the air, sharp and cold, as if she had thrown a handful of ice crystals in Elena's direction. Around them, the gentle murmur of conversation slowed, as if the entire cabin had collectively stopped breathing for a moment. Elena's chest tightened. Not with surprise she had encountered this brand of casual cruelty before, but with the familiar sting of disappointment. Here she was, in a seat she had paid for, on a flight she had taken dozens of times, and yet the invisible walls of assumption and prejudice still pressed against her. She met the woman's gaze without flinching, her voice calm and professional. "I have my boarding pass right here." "Oh, I'm sure you do," the woman replied without looking, dismissing the paper Elena held out as though it were irrelevant. "There's obviously been some kind of mistake." Elena's eyes flicked around the cabin. Passengers nearby were starting to take notice. A man in a tailored navy suit a few rows back leaned forward slightly, his expression shifting from polite curiosity to something more like anticipation. A woman across the aisle whispered to her companion, who turned to get a better look. Elena took a breath, her mind briefly running through the countless times she had built something meaningful in rooms that weren't made for people who looked like her. 8 years of flying this route, of proving her place in spaces where she was often an unwelcome guest. 8 years of quiet perseverance. You have no idea who you're dealing with, she thought, but kept the words locked inside. Instead, she pressed the call button above her head. The flight attendant who responded was a young man named Mark. According to his name tag, his hair was meticulously styled, and his practiced smile suggested he had mastered the art of customer service after thousands of interactions. He approached with the faint, nervous energy of someone hoping this would be a quick, uncomplicated fix. "Is there a problem here, ladies?" he asked, glancing first at the woman with the handbag, then at Elena. The woman, who introduced herself as Diana Whitman, launched immediately into a rehearsed explanation. "Yes, there seems to be a seating confusion. I've flown first class with this airline for over 20 years. This has never happened before." Mark's gaze flicked between the two women. Diana fit the profile of a typical first-class passenger he'd served countless times expensive clothes, a tone that suggested old money, a certain air of entitlement. Elena, with her deliberately casual appearance, was someone his training had probably never prepared him to handle. "Let me check the system," Mark said, pulling out a tablet. His fingers tapped the screen, but his posture and expression told Elena he had already decided how this should end. "Ma'am," he said to Elena, "it looks like there might have been an upgrade error. We can move you to business class. It's quite comfortable. Really." Elena's voice was quiet but firm, halting Mark mid-sentence. "I'd like you to check the reservation system again. I paid for seat 4A. I want to sit in seat 4A. Diana nodded approvingly. "That's a very reasonable solution," she said, her voice sweet with condescension. Mark glanced around, aware of the growing attention. Some passengers had lowered their phones but were clearly listening intently. "Of course," Mark replied, though Elena caught the hesitation in his voice. He spent an uncomfortably long time reviewing the screen, occasionally glancing up as if willing her to confess to some error. "May I see your boarding pass and ID, please?" he asked. Elena handed them over without comment. She had learned that compliance and patience were often the fastest way through these situations. As Mark scrutinized her documents, Elena quietly activated the voice recording app on her phone. Her fingers trembled for just a moment, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing that this was just another battle in a long war. "Everything appears to be in order," Mark finally said, though his voice carried a hint of disappointment. "I'll need to call my supervisor, just to be sure." Diana's smile broadened, confident in the universe bending in her favor. "That sounds perfectly reasonable. Standards are important." Elena leaned back against the bulkhead, her eyes scanning the cabin. She noticed the shift in conversations from light business talk to whispers and curious glances. She noticed how Diana positioned her bag more possessively, as though daring anyone to challenge her. 8 years of this route, 8 years of fighting for her rightful place. And still, here she was. Mark's supervisor arrived a woman named Lisa, with streaks of silver in her hair and the tired efficiency of a seasoned negotiator. Her eyes went to Diana first, as if silently ranking who mattered most. "We have a seating issue," Lisa said evenly, though Elena detected the bias beneath the practiced neutrality. Diana straightened, claiming the role of wronged party. "I've been a platinum member for 15 years, she said. "My company spends nearly $1 million a year with this airline." Lisa nodded sympathetically, then turned to Elena with a polite but skeptical expression. "Ma'am, I'll need to see your ID and the credit card used to purchase the ticket," she said, the request hanging like a challenge. Elena's gaze swept the cabin. The businessman reading a magazine nearby had stopped, A woman across the aisle was holding her phone as if to record. "You didn't ask her for her credit card," Elena observed, nodding toward Diana. Lisa's smile tightened. "It's standard procedure when questions arise about ticket validity." "Are there questions about ticket validity?" Elena asked softly. Her tone wasn't angry, but edged with steel. Lisa hesitated. Diana seized the moment. "I think what we're all trying to understand is how someone like you ended up with a first-class seat. No offense, but you don't exactly look like you belong here." The words dropped like stones into still water. The cabin went silent. Elena looked directly at Diana for the first time since boarding, her voice calm and clear. "My situation." "Could you be more specific?" Diana flushed, glanced around, and stammered something about economic status. Elena's voice was conversational. "And how exactly should someone who can afford first class be dressed?" The silence that followed was thick. Even the hum of the air conditioning sounded loud. Lisa looked uncomfortable. An elderly man a few rows back broke the silence. "We all paid good money. We shouldn't have to deal with this drama." Murmurs of agreement rippled. Elena felt the weight of impatience pressing down on her. Yet beneath it was something else, a cold, calculating patience forged by years of underestimation. She pulled out her phone and sent a text. "Prepare for potential PR situation. Flight 812 to Atlanta. We'll update shortly." Then she pressed the call button again, her voice calm but firm. "I'd like to speak with the captain." Lisa's face went pale. "That's not necessary. We can resolve this here." Elena's voice held no question. "I'd like to speak with the captain." The cabin watched. Diana, now confident, addressed the passengers. "Some people try to game the system, and when caught, they make a scene." A murmur of agreement. Elena remained seated, eyes steady. Her story was just beginning. Elena's calm request to reclaim her seat had barely settled in the cabin air when Diana's response sliced through with an icy sharpness. The phrase, "people like you don't sit here," echoed in Elena's mind as if spoken in a vast, empty room. It was not the first time she had heard such words, but every time they struck with the same cold sting. For a moment, Elena felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She thought about all the flights, meetings, boardrooms, and negotiations where she had to prove her worth simply because of the color of her skin. But the woman sitting beside her, unaware of the storm she had stirred, smiled sweetly and settled back in her seat as if she had already won. Elena inhaled slowly and exhaled even more deliberately. The strength that had carried her through years of adversity now settled like a quiet fire beneath her skin. She met Diana's gaze steadily and said softly but firmly, "I have every right to be here. I paid for this seat." Diana chuckled lightly, a sound that was as dismissive as it was condescending. "I'm sure you think that," she said with a patronizing tilt of her head. "But sometimes you just have to know your place." Elena's mind wrestled briefly with the urge to lash out. Anger was a tempting and natural response, but she knew all too well the power of restraint. She could let this moment define her, or she could own it with quiet authority. She chose the latter. Her voice never raised. Her posture never wavered. "My place is exactly where I have reserved it to be. If you have an issue with that, it's not my problem." Around them, the tension was growing. Passengers were subtly shifting their attention from their conversations or screens toward the unfolding drama. Some eyes showed curiosity, others discomfort, and a few even veiled disapproval of Diana's attitude. Yet many remained silent, unwilling or unsure how to intervene. Elena felt the weight of those silent gazes. She knew what it meant to be the only one in the room who looked like her, to be the one who had to speak up while others stayed quiet. The internal battle between confronting injustice and preserving peace played out silently within her. Was this confrontation necessary? Would it change anything? Could it even be worth the emotional toll? Her thoughts flickered briefly to her grandmother, a woman who had spent decades working in service jobs, never once sitting in first class, never once being treated as more than invisible. Elena's own journey had been long and arduous, built on the backs of countless sacrifices, and fueled by an unyielding belief that representation mattered. But it was more than that. It was about dignity, about demanding respect for every human being, regardless of their background or appearance. Diana, sensing Elena's silence, leaned closer and whispered, "You don't understand how things work here. This isn't just about money. It's about social order." Elena's eyes narrowed slightly. "Social order," she echoed. "Or social prejudice," before Diana could respond. Mark, the flight attendant, reappeared. His smile was practiced but carried the faintest hint of discomfort now. "Ladies, I'm going to check the reservation system again, just to be sure," he said, though Elena could tell he had already made up his mind. Mark's tablet glowed softly as he tapped through screens. Diana watched him approvingly, while Elena stood her ground quietly, observing Mark's body language. There was hesitation there, a flicker of doubt beneath his professional facade. "Ma'am," Mark said finally, "it looks like there was an upgrade error. Would you consider moving to business class? It is quite a comfortable cabin." Elena's voice was calm but resolute. "No, I paid for first class. I want to sit in my assigned seat." Mark glanced around nervously, aware of the growing attention. Passengers nearby had put down their magazines and tablets, their eyes fixed on the scene. Suddenly, Elena felt a mix of vulnerability and defiance. She was surrounded by strangers, yet acutely aware that her fight was no longer just about a seat on a plane. It was about standing firm against the invisible boundaries set by others. Her thoughts turned inward, a private dialogue unfolding. Could she hold her composure if this escalated? How many times had she faced this? Was this battle worth the emotional cost it extracted? The internal dialogue was exhausting, but necessary. Elena's phone vibrated in her pocket. A quick glance confirmed a message from her assistant, Flight 812. PR watch initiated. "Stay calm." She smiled slightly at the reminder that she was not alone in this. There was a support network ready to back her up, even as she stood here, vulnerable yet unyielding. Mark looked up, his expression shifting. "I need to call my supervisor to resolve this properly." The words sent a ripple through the cabin. Passengers exchanged whispers, some nodding in silent approval, others looking uneasy. Diana's lips curled into a triumphant smile. "Standards matter," she said aloud, loud enough for many to hear. Elena caught her breath, feeling the familiar tug of anger rising, but she swallowed it. Instead, she calmly pressed the call button again. "I'd like to speak with the captain." Mark's face paled slightly. "Ma'am, that isn't usually necessary." Elena's tone left no room for argument. "I'd like to speak with the captain." As Mark disappeared down the aisle to find the supervisor, Elena leaned back into her seat and let her eyes wander over the cabin. The people around her were no longer just passengers. They had become witnesses. Her gaze met a few that seemed curious, even supportive. One woman, seated 2 rows back, gave her a subtle nod of encouragement. A man near the front appeared conflicted, his eyes flicking between Diana and Elena. Elena thought about those silent moments in countless rooms where she had been the only person of color. She remembered the fatigue that settled in after so many fights fought quietly, the isolation that came with being seen as other. But here on this plane, in this moment, there was something different. The silence was shifting. It wasn't just the quiet before the storm. It was the pause before change. She pulled out her phone again, this time activating the voice recorder app, and started typing a message. Prepare for potential PR situation. Flight 812 to Atlanta. We'll update shortly. The supervisor arrived moments later. A woman named Lisa Monroe, with silver-streaked hair and the demeanor of someone who had handled countless conflicts. Lisa's eyes immediately settled on Diana, as if establishing a pecking order. "We have a seating dispute," Lisa said, voice calm but carrying an edge of weariness. "Let's get to the bottom of this." Diana recounted her story of loyalty to the airline, her long-standing membership status, and her company's substantial spending. Lisa nodded in understanding, but when she turned to Elena, her expression changed subtly, a flicker of doubt shadowing her politeness. "I'll need to see your identification and the credit card used to purchase your ticket," Lisa said. Elena's gaze swept the cabin, catching the looks of other passengers who were now fully attentive. She realized that she was not just defending her seat, but exposing a system that was stacked against people like her. The moment was heavy with unspoken truths. Diana leaned forward, her voice soft but venomous. "It's just unexpected to see someone like you here. Not everyone can just walk into first class." Elena held her gaze. "What exactly do you mean by someone like me?" The cabin grew silent. Even the soft hum of the air conditioning seemed distant. Lisa looked uncomfortable, caught between her role as supervisor and the reality of what she was witnessing. The man reading a newspaper near the back finally spoke. "We all paid good money for these seats. We shouldn't have to deal with this drama." Several passengers murmured their agreement. Elena felt the weight of that moment, the collective impatience, the thinly veiled resentment, and the stark reminder that her very presence was considered an inconvenience. But beneath the surface, a resolve hardened within her. She was not just fighting for a seat. She was fighting for dignity. She sent another quick text. "Document discrimination incident flight 8112. Multiple witnesses. Audio recording in progress. Prepare legal team for review on landing." Margaret Whitman noticed the phone activity and her voice rose sharply. "Are you recording this? You can't record people without permission." Elena looked up from her phone, steady and clear. "In Massachusetts, only one party needs to consent to recording a conversation. I consent." Margaret's face twisted in outrage. "This is harassment." "Flight attendant, I want this woman removed immediately." Lisa looked helpless, fumbling for her radio. "Call security," Margaret demanded triumphantly. Elena met Lisa's eyes calmly. "That sounds like a good idea. We should get additional perspectives." As Lisa reached for her radio, Elena sent one final message. "Initiate Protocol 7. Board meeting in 15 minutes. Full documentation required." The die was cast. Elena Carter was ready. The tension in the cabin was palpable when Mark Ellis returned with Lisa Monroe in tow. Elena watched as Lisa's sharp eyes quickly assessed the scene, landing first on Diana Whitman with a quiet deference that spoke volumes. It was clear that this was a woman accustomed to placating difficult customers, especially those with status and privilege. Yet, Lisa's expression betrayed a hint of fatigue, as if this type of conflict had become all too familiar in her years managing the first-class cabin. Mark gestured toward the tablet in his hand and said, "Ma'am, I've reviewed the seating chart again, and there appears to be a discrepancy with your ticket." Elena kept her voice steady as she responded. "My boarding pass and identification confirm my seat as 4A. I would appreciate it if you could verify the reservation system once more." Lisa nodded and took the tablet from Mark, tapping through the screens with practiced efficiency. She glanced up at Elena, and Elena caught the subtle shift in her gaze, an unspoken doubt wrapped in professionalism. Lisa then said, "It's possible there was an error with the system upgrade. We can offer you a seat in business class, which is quite comfortable and offers excellent service." Elena felt the familiar ache of exclusion, but she held on to her calm. "I paid for first class," she replied quietly. "I expect to be seated accordingly." Lisa hesitated, then asked, "May I see the credit card you used to purchase the ticket?" Elena's heart clenched for a moment. The request was standard in theory, but its uneven application was anything but. She noticed Lisa had not asked Diana for the same proof. This was the thinly veiled discrimination that Elena had learned to spot a mile away. Her internal monologue wrestled with the frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. She understood the power dynamics at play, and knew this moment could define the rest of her journey, but also, potentially, her ability to challenge the system. Elena extended her wallet and handed over the requested credit card with deliberate grace. "Here you go," she said evenly. Lisa scrutinized the card, then looked at Elena's identification again, her expression guarded but polite. "Thank you. I'll verify everything." As Lisa disappeared into the aisle, Elena leaned back and exhaled softly. She could feel the eyes of the cabin still upon her. Whispers buzzed through the air, like a low hum that threatened to crescendo at any moment. Nearby passengers shifted in their seats. Some avoided eye contact, unsure how to react. Others exchanged furtive glances, their expressions ranging from curiosity to judgment. Elena was acutely aware of being on display, her presence a subject of silent debate. A middle-aged man in a tailored suit whispered to his companion, "Do you think this is going to cause a delay?" The woman shook her head. "I don't know, but it's uncomfortable." Elena's mind wandered briefly to the countless meetings she had attended, where she was the only person who looked like her, where she felt the weight of every glance and whispered remark. Those experiences had taught her resilience, but also weariness. The faint buzz of a phone interrupted her thoughts. She glanced down to see a message from her legal team standby for further instructions. "Document everything." Elena smiled faintly. Her network was mobilized, yet the fight was hers to carry on the plane, alone in front of strangers. Minutes passed before Lisa returned. Her expression was a blend of professional duty and reluctant concession. "Everything appears to be in order," she announced. "There was a glitch in the system, but your seat assignment is confirmed." Elena nodded, her patience tested but intact. "Thank you." Diana, who had been sitting quietly for most of the exchange, now spoke again, her voice dripping with a mix of disdain and entitlement. "Well, I hope this won't delay the flight any further. Some people just like to make a scene." Elena's gaze sharpened. The words were thinly veiled accusations, dismissing her not only as disruptive, but as an unworthy passenger. For a moment, Elena felt the surge of old frustrations the countless times her competence and place had been questioned, not on merit, but on bias. Yet, she reminded herself that every interaction was a choice. She looked directly at Diana and said calmly, "I am not here to make a scene. I am here because I deserve to be. Your assumptions are your own problem." A ripple of murmurs passed through the cabin. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably. Others nodded quietly in agreement. Elena caught the eyes of a young woman a few rows behind her who gave a subtle thumbs up. Mark, standing nearby, cleared his throat and interjected, "Ladies, please, let's keep this professional." The flight will depart shortly. Despite his words, Mark's body language betrayed an internal conflict. His eyes lingered on Elena longer than necessary, as if wrestling with his own preconceived notions. Elena sensed it all, the invisible lines of bias, the careful navigation of social hierarchies. She was a reminder that the status quo was fragile and that power was not always where it appeared to be. Her mind replayed the words she had spoken silently just moments before. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." They had been a private warning to herself, a shield of confidence she wore beneath her composed exterior. Yet she also knew the confrontation was only the beginning. The real battle was changing the system that allowed this kind of discrimination to thrive unnoticed. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from her public relations team. Prepare for potential media coverage. Maintain calm. Document all interactions. Elena's fingers moved deftly across the screen as she began to type a message to her assistant, carefully documenting each detail of the encounter. Every word was chosen with precision, every fact recorded to ensure that her story could not be rewritten or dismissed. Around her, the cabin settled into an uneasy quiet. Conversations resumed, but the atmosphere had shifted. The usual ease of luxury travel was replaced by a tense awareness. Elena's gaze drifted to the window beside her. The airport runway stretched out in the early morning light. The engines hummed steadily, ready to carry the plane forward. She wondered how many other journeys were beginning with invisible barriers like the one she faced. Her internal dialogue was complex and unyielding. She reflected on the privilege Diana represented and the invisible privileges Elena had fought so hard to earn. She acknowledged the pain that came with being judged on appearances, the exhausting need to prove oneself constantly. Yet, beneath it all, there was hope. The hope that moments like this, when witnessed by others, could be catalysts for change. Mark approached once more, his voice softer this time. "Ms. Carter, would you like me to bring you anything before we take off?" Elena smiled gently. "No, thank you. Mark, just ensure that this flight runs smoothly for all of us." As Mark nodded and walked away, Elena felt a surge of quiet determination. The fight was far from over, but she was ready. She glanced again at Diana, who was now scrolling through her phone, her confidence seemingly undiminished, but her eyes flickering occasionally toward Elena with an unspoken recognition. The boarding process was complete. Passengers adjusted in their seats, preparing for takeoff. The first clash had been made. The real journey was just beginning. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the final passengers settled into their seats. Elena sat quietly, the weight of the unfolding situation pressing against her calm exterior. The muted conversations around her felt distant, like echoes in a vast chamber. But the storm was far from over. Mark Ellis approached again, this time his face etched with more concern than before. "Miss Carter, I'm going to call my supervisor to assist with this seating issue," he said carefully. "She's experienced with situations like this." Elena nodded, her voice steady. "Thank you. Mark, I appreciate your help." A few minutes later, Lisa Monroe returned to the first-class cabin, her presence commanding but tinged with the exhaustion of someone who had long navigated difficult encounters. Her silver-streaked hair caught the soft cabin light, and her gaze was sharp as she approached Elena's seat. "Ms. Carter," Lisa began, "I understand there's a concern about your seat assignment." Elena gave a small, polite nod. "That's correct." Lisa glanced toward Diana Whitman, seated confidently nearby, and then back to Elena. "To clarify and resolve the issue, I'll need to verify your identification again, as well as the credit card used for your purchase." Elena's eyes flickered momentarily. She had anticipated this. The request was standard procedure on the surface, but its uneven application was clear. Lisa had not asked Diana for the same documentation, without hesitation. Elena extended her wallet and handed over the credit card along with her identification. "Here they are," she said calmly. Lisa took the documents with a practiced smile. Yet Elena could sense a subtle difference in her demeanor when dealing with her compared to Diana. It was the kind of behavior Elena had learned to recognize early in her career, small, almost invisible acts of bias that added up to exclusion. As Lisa disappeared down the aisle to verify the information, Elena leaned back into her seat. The low murmur of voices and the occasional rustling of papers filled the space. Her mind wandered briefly to the countless boardrooms where she had sat as the only person of color, where every meeting was a test of her worthiness. She thought about her grandmother, a woman who had worked tirelessly in service roles without ever sitting in first class. Elena's own success was built on those sacrifices, and every moment like this was a reminder of how far she had come and how far society still needed to go. Passengers nearby were watching intently. Some avoided direct eye contact, uncomfortable with the tension, while others whispered to companions, debating quietly. A businessman a few rows back leaned forward, lowering his financial magazine. "What's going on over there?" he asked softly. His companion shrugged, but her eyes remained fixed on Elena's brow. Elena felt the familiar sensation of being both visible and invisible, at once the paradox of her position in spaces not designed for her. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather-bound notebook, opening it to jot down the details of the encounter so far. She had learned over the years that documentation was her ally, a way to ensure that moments like this were not erased or twisted. Lisa returned moments later, her expression unreadable. She handed Elena's documents back and said, "Everything appears to be in order. There was a technical glitch with the seating system, but your seat assignment is confirmed." Relief fluttered briefly in Elena's chest, but it was tempered by the realization that the conflict was far from resolved. Diana's voice cut through the quiet. "Well, I hope this doesn't delay the flight. Some people just love to make a fuss." Elena met Diana's gaze directly. "I am not here to make a fuss. I am here because I have earned my place." Diana scoffed lightly. "Earned your place? You don't understand how things work in these circles." Elena's thoughts raced. She remembered the countless microaggressions, the subtle messages that told her she didn't belong, not because of her skills or accomplishments, but because of her skin color and background. She fought the urge to respond with anger. Instead, she chose words that carried the weight of her experience. Maybe it's time the rules changed. The murmurs in the cabin grew louder. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably. Others exchanged knowing looks. Elena's phone buzzed again. She glanced down to see a message from her legal team's situation escalating. "Stay composed. Continue documentation." She began typing a detailed note about the exchange with Lisa and Diana, capturing every word, every tone. Mark approached once more, clearing his throat. "Ms. Carter, is there anything I can do to make your flight more comfortable while we sort this out?" Elena offered a small, genuine smile. "Thank you, Mark. Just doing your job is enough." As Mark walked away, Elena's gaze drifted toward the window. The runway stretched out beneath the soft morning light, the engines humming quietly, ready for takeoff. Her mind turned inward. The fight to claim her seat was about more than comfort or status. It was about dignity, respect, and the right to exist fully and freely in spaces that had long excluded people like her. She thought about the generations before her who had been denied seats, denied opportunities, denied respect. And she thought about the responsibility she carried not just for herself, but for those who could not fight. Lisa returned with one final request. "Ms. Carter, I must ask that you remain patient as we finalize the details. Our goal is to ensure everyone's comfort and safety." Helena nodded, masking the frustration behind a composed exterior. Patience was a weapon, but she also knew when to wield it carefully. As Lisa turned to leave, Helena's phone buzzed insistently. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from her public relations team. "Prepare for media attention, maintain calm, document all interactions." Her fingers moved quickly, sending a brief update to her assistant's situation ongoing. "Documentation continues. Ready for next steps." Helena looked around once more. The cabin was a microcosm of the world outside people, divided by assumptions, power, and fear. She felt a quiet strength rise within her. This was not just about a seat on a plane. It was about challenging the systems that allowed bias to thrive in silence, and she was ready to lead that challenge. The cabin had quieted, but the atmosphere remained charged with unspoken tension. Helena felt the weight of every gaze that lingered a little too long, every whispered conversation that faltered when she looked up. The luxury of first class, usually a sanctuary of comfort and calm, had turned into a stage for something far more complex and uncomfortable. Around her, passengers adjusted in their seats, shifting papers, scrolling through phones, or simply staring ahead. Yet beneath their polite facades was a storm of curiosity, judgment, and unspoken opinions. Some looked at Helena with sympathy, others with skepticism, and some with plain indifference. The silent spectrum of human response was laid bare. Helena was acutely aware of being under scrutiny. She could almost feel the mental inventory some passengers were making the way she dressed, the calm confidence in her posture, the absence of overt anger in her expression. She knew what many were thinking. How did she get here? Did she belong? Her internal monologue ran deep as she fought to maintain her composure. She remembered 1,000 similar moments in her life. Boardrooms where she was the only woman of color. Social events where she was politely included but never fully embraced. The exhaustion of constantly proving oneself to invisible standards weighed heavily. Yet this moment on the plane was different. It was public in a way few of her past experiences had been. Cameras, phones, and the ever-present threat of viral exposure added new layers to the pressure. She knew that what happened here could ripple far beyond the cabin walls. Her thoughts flicked to her grandmother, who had spent decades working in the background, invisible to most. The sacrifices that had paved the way for Helena's success were never far from her mind. The memory fueled her resolve. This was about more than just a seat. It was about dignity and the right to exist fully without apology. A subtle shift caught Helena's attention. A couple seated nearby, a man and woman of Asian descent, had moved slightly forward, their expressions serious as they observed the unfolding situation. The woman whispered something to her companion, who nodded quietly. They were allies in a sea of uncertainty. Helena's gaze met theirs briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. She wasn't alone. From the corner of her eye, she noticed a middle-aged businessman who had been reading a magazine earlier. He had set the publication aside and now watched intently, his face a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. It was clear the incident was stirring something within him, even if he was reluctant to voice it. Passengers who had previously seemed indifferent were now whispering among themselves. The murmur of hushed conversations was like the flutter of wings, restless and charged. Elena felt the eyes of some passengers narrow in judgment, their lips pursed in silent disapproval. Others avoided looking at her altogether, unwilling to confront the uncomfortable truth of what was happening. The woman next to Elena, Diana Whitman, sat with an air of smug confidence. She glanced occasionally at Elena, her smile tight and cold. The entitlement that had fueled her earlier remarks still lingered, but now it was tinged with a subtle unease. Elena's internal struggle was as intense as the external one. She battled feelings of isolation and alienation while drawing on reservoirs of strength cultivated over years. The tension between vulnerability and resilience was palpable. She reminded herself that every person in this cabin was a product of their experiences, biases, and fears. Some were allies, some adversaries, and many were bystanders. The role of bystanders, the silent witnesses, had always been a subject of reflection for Elena. The choice to remain silent in the face of injustice was as powerful as the choice to speak up. She understood the comfort of avoidance, the fear of involvement, but also the cost. Her fingers hovered over her phone as she drafted a message to her legal team, documenting the reactions around her. The words flowed carefully, capturing the mood and nuances without emotion. Nearby, a woman whispered to her companion, "Do you think she belongs here?" Her companion's reply was barely audible. "I don't know. It's complicated." Elena's mind parsed the words. Complicated, a polite way of saying unwelcome. The man in the suit spoke again, this time louder. "We paid a premium for these seats. We shouldn't have to deal with this kind of drama." The comment was met with murmurs of agreement from several passengers. Elena's heart tightened. The complaint wasn't about the situation itself, but about her presence, the unspoken belief that she was an inconvenience. Yet she refused to shrink. Instead, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She thought about how society often demanded that people like her be perfect, calm, and unassuming in the face of discrimination, while those perpetuating bias were free to act with entitlement. The injustice of this double standard was a familiar weight she carried, but it also sharpened her determination. Her phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen and saw another message from her public relations team. "Situation escalating. Keep calm. Continue to document." Elena's fingers tapped out a message to her assistant. Passenger reactions mixed, documenting all whispers and looks, preparing for escalation. The cabin's atmosphere shifted subtly as the flight attendants prepared for departure. The routine sounds of buckling seat belts and safety demonstrations filled the space. Yet beneath the surface, a quiet tension remained. Elena's thoughts turned to the future. She wondered how many passengers here would carry this moment with them. Would it challenge their assumptions or reinforce them? The Asian American couple approached Elena quietly during a pause in the commotion. "We've seen this kind of treatment before," the woman said softly. "Thank you for standing your ground." Elena smiled gently, grateful for the solidarity. "Thank you for speaking up. It means more than you know." The man nodded. "It's easy to be silent when it's not your fight, but silence only lets things stay the same." Elena's gaze swept the cabin once more. Some passengers seemed to avoid her eyes. Others looked thoughtful, and a few avoided looking at all. The realization settled over her like a gentle tide. This was more than a conflict over a seat. It was a reflection of a larger struggle that played out every day in countless spaces. She thought about the power of witnessing, of bearing silent testimony. Sometimes just being seen and refusing to be erased was an act of resistance. Her phone buzzed with another incoming message. This time it was a reminder from her assistant board meeting in 15 minutes. Full documentation required. Elena took a deep breath and tapped the screen to acknowledge. She sat back, bracing herself. The battle was far from over, and the next steps would require all the strength and composure she could summon. Elena Carter's fingers hovered over her phone as she silently activated the voice recording app. She knew this moment was critical. Every word, every exchange could become evidence, a shield against the injustices she had already endured too many times. The cold logic of documentation balanced her inner turmoil, feelings of frustration and weariness tangled with a deep resolve. Her eyes flicked to Diana Whitman, whose smug expression had only hardened since the confrontation began. Diana's confidence came from a place of unquestioned privilege, a lifetime of never having to prove her worth beyond her appearance and social standing. Elena could almost feel the invisible walls Diana had built around herself, walls that excluded anyone who didn't fit a narrowly defined mold. Elena pressed record and started typing a detailed message to her legal team. Incident ongoing. Passenger Diana Whitman refusing to yield seat 4A. Despite confirmed boarding pass and payment, flight attendants and supervisor showing bias. Multiple witnesses present. Audio and video recording in progress. The familiar buzz of incoming messages reassured her. Her network was mobilized, ready to respond if needed. But the fight was still hers on this plane. Mark Ellis, the flight attendant, hovered awkwardly nearby. His polite demeanor was beginning to crack under the pressure. Elena noticed his hesitation, the way he glanced repeatedly between Diana and herself, as if caught between the script of his job and the uncomfortable truth of the situation. "Is everything all right?" Ma'am Mark asked cautiously. Elena's voice was calm and steady. "Yes, thank you. Please continue to do your job." Mark nodded, but Elena could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes. It was a reminder that those on the front lines of service often carried their own conflicts torn between expectations and conscience. Around her, the cabin seemed to hold its breath. Passengers were no longer just observers. Some had started discreetly recording the incident on their own devices. The quiet clicks and hums of phones added a new soundtrack to the confrontation. Elena's heart pounded quietly beneath her calm exterior. This was no longer just about a seat or a moment of prejudice. It was about exposing a system that allowed such discrimination to persist unchecked. She glanced at Diana, who was now staring at Elena's phone, suspicion flickering in her eyes. For the first time, Diana's composure faltered, her confident facade revealing cracks. Elena's mind drifted momentarily to the countless times she had been told to keep quiet, to not make waves, to know her place. Each memory fueled her determination to make this moment count not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been dismissed or diminished. The stewardess supervisor, Lisa Monroe, approached again. Her face was a mask of professionalism, but Elena sensed unease beneath it. "Ms. Carter, I must insist that recording without permission is against airline policy," Lisa said quietly but firmly. Elena did not look up from her phone. "In Massachusetts, only one party's consent is required. I am consenting." Lisa's eyes flickered with frustration, but she said no more. The presence of the other passengers, many of whom were now openly filming, made enforcement impossible without escalating tensions. A ripple of whispers moved through the cabin. Elena could hear fragments recording again. "She's standing her ground. This is going to blow up." The dynamic had shifted. Elena was no longer alone. The power of witness was turning the tide. Her thoughts turned inward again. The internal dialogue was fierce, yet focused. how to remain composed when every instinct demanded to fight back harder, how to protect herself without losing the grace that had become her trademark. She knew the importance of this balance. Anger could be weaponized against her, dismissed as irrational or emotional. Calm, on the other hand, carried undeniable strength. Her phone vibrated again. A message from her public relations team. Potential media interest. Keep recording. Prepare statement for post-flight. Elena typed back a brief acknowledgement and then switched to taking discreet video footage of the cabin, capturing the stares, the whispers, the uneasy glances. Diana Whitman noticed and glared. "Stop that," she hissed, voice low but filled with venom. Elena's reply was steady. "I'm documenting the truth." The words echoed more loudly in her mind than in the cabin. Documentation was a lifeline. It was how history was recorded, how injustices were challenged, and how voices like hers could not be erased. Mark approached once more. His expression conflicted. "Ms. Carter, the captain has been informed. We're trying to handle this as quickly as possible." Elena nodded. "Thank you. Mark, please keep me updated." Her eyes scanned the cabin again. Some passengers were clearly uncomfortable with the attention, while others seemed quietly supportive. A few whispered words of encouragement to each other, as if drawn together by a shared understanding of what was happening. The power of collective witness was growing. Her mind circled back to the moment Diana had claimed, "People like you don't belong here." The phrase was more than an insult. It was a reflection of a society that often sought to exclude those who challenged the status quo. Elena knew that changing minds would not be quick or easy. But moments like this were seeds, small disruptions that could grow into something bigger. The plane's engines hummed steadily. The pilot's voice came over the intercom, calm and professional, announcing an impending delay due to a seating issue that needed resolution. Elena felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The delay meant more time under scrutiny, but also more time to assert her rights. She pressed a final message to her assistant, Initiate Protocol 7. Prepare for board meeting post-flight. Full documentation submitted. The cabin had become a crucible for change. The confrontation no longer just between two passengers, but a broader reckoning of power, privilege, and justice. Elena breathed deeply and steadied herself. The journey was far from over, but she was ready to see it through. The cabin door slid open with a quiet whoosh, and two figures stepped inside, their presence immediately shifting the atmosphere. Elena's eyes lifted toward the newcomers' airport security officers. One was a young black woman named Officer Maria Lopez, whose calm professionalism radiated strength. Beside her stood Officer Blake Simmons, an older white man with a stoic demeanor that seemed both reassuring and formal. Elena sat upright, meeting their gazes with steady resolve. The presence of uniformed officers brought a new gravity to the situation. What had once been a tense exchange between passengers and staff was now a matter of official intervention. Diana Whitman wasted no time positioning herself as the aggrieved party. "Officers, thank you for coming. This woman has been causing a disturbance. She refuses to move to business class and is recording people without permission," Diana stated, her voice dripping with indignation. Officer Lopez looked directly at Elena, her expression professional but not unsympathetic. "Ma'am, could you please explain what's happening?" Elena's reply was measured and clear. "I am sitting in the seat I paid for. I have my boarding pass and identification. Despite this, I have been asked to provide additional documentation that others have not been required to show. When I questioned this unequal treatment, I was accused of trying to game the system and told I don't belong here. She handed over her documents to Officer Lopez, who examined them carefully before passing them to her partner for verification. The moment stretched. The hum of the engines underscored the silence. Officer Simmons nodded after checking the papers. The seat assignment is confirmed. It seems this has been a misunderstanding regarding the reservation system, Diana immediately interjected, attempting to downplay the situation. Obviously, there was a technical error. These things happen. The important thing is to resolve this quickly so we can depart. Around the cabin, the dynamics were shifting. Passengers who had previously watched with mild curiosity now showed signs of alignment. Some nodded in silent agreement with Elena, others looked uncertain, and a few whispered about the fairness of the situation. A couple from business class, an Asian American man and woman who had been observing from a distance, moved closer. The woman spoke up with quiet conviction. "We've been watching this entire exchange. It's clear that Ms. Carter showed her boarding pass and ID. Why is she being treated differently?" Diana snapped. "Thank you. But this doesn't concern you." Her voice was sharp, defensive. The man replied evenly. "It concerns us because we have experienced similar treatment. We recognize what this is." The cabin buzzed with renewed energy. Conversations began to ripple through the rows, some passengers openly taking sides, while others exchanged glances laden with meaning. Elena felt the rising tide of support mingled with the frustration of knowing that these moments were only the surface of a deeper, systemic problem. She remembered the countless times she had witnessed silence in the face of injustice, the bystanders who chose convenience over courage. Her phone buzzed with messages from her team, updates on social media mentions, and the initial stirrings of public interest. The power of digital witness was undeniable. Diana, sensing her grip on the narrative loosening, rose and addressed the cabin in a tone meant to command attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want everyone to see what's happening here. I am being attacked and harassed for simply pointing out that there are standards for first-class travel. I have been a loyal customer for years, and this is how I am treated." She pulled out her phone and began recording, her voice gaining strength. "My name is Diana Whitman, and I am being discriminated against because I questioned why someone who doesn't belong in first class is trying to take my seat." Her words reverberated through the cabin. Several passengers began filming on their own devices, capturing the scene for social media. The live stream began to gather viewers in real time. Notifications buzzed on Diana's phone, and she smiled with the satisfaction of someone who believed the narrative was firmly in her favor. Officer Lopez stepped between Diana and Elena. "Ma'am, I need you to stop recording and sit down." "Why should I?" Diana shot back. "I have rights." "Yes, you do," Officer Lopez said evenly, "and so does everyone else. Right now, you are creating a disturbance." "I am not creating a disturbance." "She is," Diana insisted, gesturing toward Elena. Elena finally spoke, her voice calm but resolute. "Officer Lopez, I would like to file a formal complaint about discriminatory treatment by airline staff." The officer nodded. "We can assist you with that once this situation is resolved." Suddenly, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Morrison. We are experiencing a brief delay while we address an urgent situation. We apologize for the inconvenience." Diana's expression transformed from confident to frustrated. Elena allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. "Yes," she said quietly. "Someone with authority." The intercom crackled again, but this time it was not the captain who spoke. A voice filled the cabin, older, measured, authoritative. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Michael Richardson, CEO of Airline XYZ. I apologize for this unexpected announcement, but I must address a serious situation aboard Flight 812. The cabin fell into a stunned silence. Richardson continued, "It has come to my attention that a passenger aboard this flight has been subjected to discriminatory treatment and harassment by both staff and other passengers. This passenger is Ms. Elena Carter, chairwoman and CEO of Carter Enterprises." The words hit the cabin like a physical force. Elena felt eyes on her, some wide with shock, others dropping quickly to avoid her gaze. Diana's face drained of color, and Lisa Monroe looked as if she might be sick. Several passengers stopped recording as if suddenly realizing the gravity of the moment. For those unfamiliar with Ms. Carter's work, Richardson went on, she is a major shareholder in Airline XYZ and the architect behind our leading diversity and inclusion policies. The silence deepened. The mechanical hum of the aircraft seemed muted. Ms. Carter has been a regular passenger on our flights for over 10 years and is well known to senior management. Any staff involved in discriminatory behavior will face immediate termination. Passengers who harass or record inappropriate behavior may be permanently banned. Elena reached into her bag and pulled out a tablet, tapping the screen to display her corporate credentials, board positions, and a clear photo ID. Diana stared, her mouth opening and closing silently. Richardson offered a formal apology. On behalf of Airline XYZ, I offer our sincerest apologies to Ms. Carter. A full investigation will commence immediately. Officer Lopez stepped forward with professional respect. Ms. Carter, is there anything you require from us at this time? Elena scanned the cabin, noting the faces of those who had judged her only minutes before. Diana avoided eye contact. The businessman who had voiced impatience stared down at his hands. Lisa Monroe's expression was one of reluctant acceptance. I believe the situation is under control, Elena said softly. Captain Morrison's voice returned. Ms. Carter, please accept my apologies on behalf of the crew. We will make all necessary accommodations to ensure your comfort, Diana whispered. I didn't know who you were. Elena met her gaze. And if I weren't exactly who I am, would that make your behavior acceptable? Diana had no answer. Passengers who had supported Elena earlier approached her quietly. Thank you for your grace, one woman said. That took courage. Elena nodded. Thank you for speaking up. The cabin's atmosphere shifted from tension to quiet respect. Passengers who had earlier watched the drama now avoided eye contact or whispered apologies. Diana's phone buzzed relentlessly with notifications as she desperately tried to delete her video, but it was too late. Screenshots and clips were already circulating widely. Her phone rang, and she answered with trembling hands. Hello, what? No, I can explain. Minutes later, the conversation ended with Diana staring at her phone in disbelief. Elena watched all of this with clinical detachment. The real power had been sitting quietly beside Diana all along, waiting to see how far ignorance would carry the day. It had not carried it far. The cabin was buzzing quietly, yet the invisible threads of tension had woven themselves deeper into the fabric of Flight 812. The earlier confrontation, now broadcast across countless smartphones, had become more than just a private dispute between two passengers. It was unfolding live before the eyes of a global audience. Passengers who had once kept their phones discreetly in pockets or bags now openly filmed, snapping photos and recording video with growing urgency. The soft hum of conversation was replaced by the steady click of record buttons, the low buzz of notifications, and occasional whispers about the viral potential of what was happening at 30,000 feet. Elena sat poised but aware. She knew this was no ordinary delay. The digital age had transformed every moment into a possible spectacle, every interaction into a potential movement. She glanced down at her own phone, where streams of messages flooded and alerts from her legal team, notes from her public relations advisors, and encouraging texts from friends and allies. Her message to her assistant was concise: social media engagement increasing. #trending. Maintain composure and continue documenting. Statement draft ready for review. The couple who had earlier defended her quietly approached and offered their support again. "This is bigger than just one flight," the woman said softly. "We've seen this kind of treatment before, and it's always been hidden." Elena nodded. Visibility is the first step toward change. Meanwhile, Diana Whitman's demeanor had shifted dramatically. The smug confidence that had carried her through the initial confrontation was now laced with panic. Her phone vibrated incessantly, a nonstop stream of notifications pulling her attention in every direction. She attempted to regain control by live streaming her own version of events, portraying herself as the victim of harassment and unjust accusations. But the tide was turning. Her broadcast was met with skepticism and criticism, and many viewers began to side with Elena. The airline's internal communication channels were ablaze. Senior executives monitored the situation closely, aware that the incident threatened not only the flight's schedule, but the company's reputation. The story was spreading rapidly across social media platforms, drawing attention from journalists, influencers, and advocacy groups. Elena's own social media accounts were active, but she kept her updates measured and purposeful. Her messages emphasized dignity, respect, and the power of standing firm in the face of injustice. Every post was crafted to inspire reflection rather than anger. She was careful to steer the narrative away from personal attacks, focusing instead on the broader issues of systemic bias and the need for institutional accountability. Passengers began sharing their own experiences quietly among themselves. A businessman seated nearby leaned over to Elena. "This is a wake-up call for many of us," he said. "Sometimes we don't see what's happening right in front of us." Elena smiled gently. "That's why conversations like this matter. They push us to confront uncomfortable truths." The flight attendant, Mark Ellis, approached cautiously. His earlier unease had deepened into genuine concern. "Miss Carter, is there anything I can do for you while we wait?" "Thank you, Mark," Elena replied softly. "Please let the crew know we are prepared to cooperate fully with any requests from the authorities." As the hours passed, the airline's crisis team sprang into action. Press releases were drafted, statements prepared, and legal consultations underway. The incident had become a lightning rod for discussions about diversity, equity, and inclusion not only within the airline industry, but across corporate America. The Asian American couple took part in several interviews after the flight, sharing how witnessing Elena's poise and dignity had inspired them to speak out more in their own lives. Their voices added weight to the growing chorus calling for change. Elena's internal dialogue was complex. The relentless scrutiny was exhausting, but she recognized the unique opportunity this moment presented. It was a chance to amplify voices often silenced and to push for tangible reforms. She thought about the countless people who lacked the platform she had. Her role was not just to defend her own rights, but to serve as a beacon for those who could not. Meanwhile, Diana Whitman faced mounting consequences. Her employer contacted her urgently, demanding an explanation and distancing themselves from her actions. The viral videos had sparked backlash not just online, but in her professional and personal circles. Elena remained composed, despite the storm swirling around her. The experience was a stark reminder of the power imbalance that still existed. But it also reinforced her belief in the necessity of resilience and measured leadership. As the plane finally prepared for descent, Elena reflected on the strange paradox of the situation. What had started as a personal confrontation had evolved into a public reckoning, exposing the fractures in society's pretenses. Her phone chimed with one last message before landing. "Thank you for your courage. This will change things." She looked out the window at the sprawling cityscape of Atlanta below. The landing was imminent, but the journey toward justice was just beginning. The hum of the airplane's engines was barely noticeable now as the cabin held its collective breath. The usual background chatter had ceased, replaced by a heavy silence filled with anticipation. Suddenly, the intercom crackled, and an authoritative voice resonated through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Michael Richardson, Chief Executive Officer of Airline XYZ. I apologize for the unexpected interruption, but I need to address a serious matter that has come to my attention aboard Flight 812. Passengers exchanged curious and surprised glances. Even Diana Whitman, who had carried herself with such confidence moments before, now looked unsettled. Richardson's voice was calm but firm. "It has come to my attention that a passenger, Ms. Elena Carter, has been subjected to discriminatory treatment by our staff and harassment by other passengers." The cabin fell into a stunned silence. Elena felt the weight of every gaze turned toward her, the collective focus intense and unyielding. "For those who may not know, Ms. Carter is the chairwoman and chief executive officer of Carter Enterprises, a major stakeholder in Airline XYZ. She is also the architect of our industry-leading diversity and inclusion policies." The words hit the cabin like a physical force. Passengers who had been recording moments ago stopped, their devices lowering as realization dawned. Diana's face went pale, and Lisa Monroe, the supervisor, looked as though she might faint. "Ms. Carter has been a valued passenger on our flights for over 10 years. And her presence is well known to our senior management team. We have zero tolerance for discriminatory behavior of any kind." Richardson's tone sharpened. "Any employee found participating in discriminatory conduct will face immediate termination. Passengers who engage in harassment or discriminatory actions may be banned permanently from our airline." Elena reached into her bag and pulled out a tablet, quickly bringing up her corporate credentials, board memberships, and a photo identification that left no doubt about her identity. She handed the device to Officer Maria Lopez, who had been watching intently. Diana stared at the screen in disbelief, her mouth opening and closing without a sound. The realization that she had misjudged Elena and underestimated her was crushing. Richardson's voice filled the cabin once more. "On behalf of Airline XYZ, I offer our sincerest apologies to Ms. Carter. A full investigation into this incident will begin immediately." The atmosphere in the cabin shifted palpably. What had been tension now gave way to solemn recognition. Passengers who had previously whispered or watched in silence began to murmur words of support. Officer Lopez approached Elena with professional respect. "Is there anything you require from us at this time?" Elena scanned the faces around her. The man who had earlier voiced impatience now looked down, ashamed. Lisa Monroe's posture sagged with defeat. "I believe the situation is well in hand," Elena said softly. "Thank you." Captain Morrison's voice returned over the intercom. "Ms. Carter, please accept my personal apologies on behalf of the entire crew. We are committed to making any accommodations necessary to ensure your comfort for the remainder of the journey." Elena nodded graciously. "Thank you, Captain." That is appreciated." Diana's voice was a mere whisper now. "I didn't know who you were." Elena turned to face her directly for the first time. Her voice was calm but cutting. "And if I hadn't been exactly who I am, would your behavior have been acceptable?" Diana had no answer. Nearby passengers who had defended Elena earlier now approached her quietly. "Thank you for your strength and dignity," one woman said. "It took courage to speak up." Elena smiled gently. "Thank you for standing with me. That means everything." The cabin's atmosphere had transformed completely. Passengers who had earlier watched with entertainment or mild support for Diana now avoided eye contact and whispered apologies. The handful of passengers who had been live streaming the confrontation began scrambling to delete videos and screenshots. But the viral nature of the incident meant that it was already too late. Elena watched Diana's phone buzz incessantly. She saw the fear in the woman's eyes as she tried to explain herself over a call. The words Elena overheard were desperate. "This is a misunderstanding. Please, I can explain." Her employer was not as forgiving. Reports came in that Diana's consulting firm was reviewing her conduct and distancing itself rapidly. Meanwhile, the Asian American couple who had spoken out became advocates for the power of allyship and bystander intervention, giving interviews and speaking at corporate events. Elena herself began planning a comprehensive initiative. She wanted this incident to be a turning point, not just a viral moment. She envisioned anonymous reporting systems, bias training, and legal protections for those who spoke out. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from a close friend and colleague. "Proud of how you handled this. Your strength is inspiring. Let's make sure this changes things." Elena's thoughts turned inward. The incident had laid bare uncomfortable truths about society and power, but it had also shown the possibility of transformation. As Flight 8 and 12 began its descent into Atlanta, Elena looked out over the sprawling cityscape below. The world was vast and complicated, full of challenges and injustices, but moments like this, moments of courage, clarity, and community were sparks that could ignite change. Elena felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was not the end of her journey, but a beginning. The plane finally touched down at Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, the wheels rolling steadily along the runway as the hum of the engines softened. But inside the cabin, the tension lingered, thick and unyielding, like a storm that had not yet passed. Passengers shifted nervously in their seats, their eyes occasionally flicking toward Elena Carter, who sat composed but alert. The announcement from the CEO and the captain's apologies had changed the atmosphere dramatically, but the aftermath was still settling in. Lisa Monroe, the flight attendant supervisor, sat quietly near the back, her posture rigid, her face pale. The weight of the CEO's words and the reality of her own actions pressed down on her. 8 years of service at Airline XYZ, undone in a moment by the harsh consequences of bias. A security officer approached her discreetly with a radio in hand. The message was terse and clear. Lisa's employment was terminated effective immediately. She was to be escorted from the aircraft once all passengers disembarked. The news spread swiftly among the crew, a somber reminder of accountability. Lisa's eyes darted toward Elena. A mixture of regret and pleading etched into her expression. But Elena's face remained calm, almost clinical. There was no place for forgiveness in that moment, only the quiet acceptance of justice. Diana Whitman sat in her seat, her phone in hand, buzzing nonstop with notifications. Her earlier confidence was shattered, replaced by mounting anxiety. The viral videos, social media backlash, and professional repercussions loomed large. She answered a call, voice trembling. "Hello, No. I understand this is serious. Please, let me explain. But the response on the other end was firm and unyielding. The consulting firm she worked for was distancing itself, and colleagues were already expressing shock and disappointment. Diana's world was unraveling faster than she could control. The humiliation was complete. Meanwhile, Eleanor received messages from allies, partners, and supporters. The incident was sparking conversations far beyond the cabin walls. Journalists reached out for interviews. Advocacy groups praised her courage. But Elena knew the real work was only beginning. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind how progress was forged through persistence, not single victories. She thought of the many people who face discrimination every day without the resources or platform to fight back. Eleanor reached out to the airline's Diversity and Inclusion Department, proposing a new initiative, anonymous reporting systems, mandatory bias training for all staff, and protections for whistleblowers. She wanted to ensure that no one else would endure what she had experienced without recourse. The Asian American couple who had spoken up became vocal advocates for bystander intervention, often invited to conferences and corporate trainings. Their voices added momentum to the growing movement for change. Eleanor herself began preparing a formal statement to release publicly once she landed, carefully balancing the personal with the political. She wanted to inspire, to challenge, to invite reflection. As passengers disembarked, many approached Eleanor quietly, offering apologies or expressing support. Some spoke of their own experiences with bias and the courage it took to confront it. One elderly woman whispered, "Thank you for standing up. You gave me hope." Elena smiled gently, feeling the warmth of genuine connection amidst the storm. Diana, escorted by security, avoided eye contact with the passengers who once had envied her status. The contrast was stark. Power had shifted, and with it, the narrative. Elena's internal dialogue was reflective, but resolute. The incident was a microcosm of larger societal issues: inequality, prejudice, the abuse of power. But it was also a testament to the impact one person could make by refusing to be silenced. She thought about the future, how to transform pain into progress, exclusion into inclusion, silence into dialogue. Her phone buzzed again with a message from a young activist she admired. "This story is already changing lives. Keep leading." Elena looked out the plane window as the city lights of Atlanta blurred beneath her. The journey was far from over, but the path was clearer than ever. Change was possible, and it started with moments like this. As the passengers gathered their belongings and prepared to disembark, a small group slowly formed around Eleanor Carter's seat. The cabin, once filled with tension and whispered judgments, now carried an air of tentative curiosity and a desire for understanding. What had begun as confrontation was evolving into conversation. Eleanor looked around at the faces, some familiar, some new, each reflecting a mixture of emotions: curiosity, remorse, hope. The Asian American couple who had stood by her earlier were among them, as well as a few passengers from business class who had quietly observed the ordeal. She took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice clear and steady. "I want to be clear about something. Today wasn't about me being powerful enough to fight back. It was about revealing systemic problems that many people face every day, but often cannot address." Her eyes met those of the businessman who had earlier expressed impatience, but now seemed reflective. "Most people don't have the resources or platform I have. Most people just absorb the humiliation and move on." A woman from business class raised her hand tentatively. "What should we have done?" "Those of us who saw what was happening but didn't know how to intervene." Elena smiled gently. "You speak up, even when it's uncomfortable. especially when it's uncomfortable. The Asian American woman nodded emphatically. Discrimination thrives in silence. It depends on bystanders choosing not to act, hoping someone else will. Elena nodded in agreement. Every interaction is a choice. You can perpetuate bias or challenge it. You can stay silent or speak up. A young man in the group spoke softly. But what if you're afraid? Afraid of the consequences or of making things worse? Elena's gaze softened. Fear is natural. But courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite it. Change often starts with discomfort. She pulled out her tablet and shared a press release from Carter Enterprises announcing a new initiative: anonymous reporting systems for discrimination, whistleblower protections, and mandatory bias training across all portfolio companies. We're turning this incident into something positive, she said, because representation matters only if we use it to change systems, not just to protect ourselves. The businessman nodded slowly. I never thought about it that way. It's easier to assume there's a reasonable explanation than to face the truth. Elena's voice carried the weight of experience. That's the problem. People don't think about it until they're forced to witness it directly. A middle-aged woman added quietly, "How do we change the culture? How do we get people to see their own biases?" Elena looked around, meeting each pair of eyes with sincerity. By starting conversations like this, by choosing to be uncomfortable, by questioning our assumptions, the atmosphere shifted. Defensive postures softened. The group began sharing their own experiences, moments of prejudice, times they remained silent, regrets about missed opportunities to intervene. Elena listened with empathy, feeling the threads of connection weaving between them. She shared a story from her early career when she had been overlooked for a promotion, not because of skill, but because of bias. It was painful, but it taught me that resilience isn't just about enduring, it's about transforming. One passenger, a young woman, whispered, "I've been afraid to speak up before, but hearing you makes me want to try." Elena smiled warmly. That's how change happens. One conversation at a time, one choice at a time. The group lingered, reluctant to disperse. They spoke openly about the discomfort of confronting bias and the importance of allyship. Elena's phone buzzed softly. She glanced at a message from her assistant board meeting scheduled. Full documentation prepared. She pocketed the phone and returned her attention to the group. "This isn't the end," she said. "It's a beginning. We all have a role to play." Passengers nodded, some wiping tears from their eyes, others simply breathing deeply as if releasing long-held burdens. Elena thought of her grandmother again, her quiet strength and unwavering dignity. This moment was for her, for every person who had ever been made to feel less than. The plane began its final descent, the city lights of Atlanta growing closer beneath them. Elena looked out the window, feeling a profound sense of hope. Change was not just possible, it was inevitable. And it started here, in this cabin, with these conversations. The wheels of Flight 812 touched down smoothly on the tarmac of Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. The passengers began to gather their belongings, the cabin buzzing softly with quiet conversations. The mood was markedly different from the tense atmosphere that had gripped the plane only hours before. Elena Carter stood calmly, her black leather satchel once again slung over her shoulder. She glanced around the cabin, taking in the faces of those who had been part of this journey, some filled with newfound respect, others with reflective remorse. She saw passengers who had once watched the unfolding events as mere entertainment now offering genuine apologies, and those who had judged her harshly now avoiding her gaze. Diana Whitman sat near the front, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. The glow from the screen reflected a mixture of anxiety and disbelief. The viral video had not only tarnished her reputation, but had also set in motion repercussions she could neither predict nor control. Her consulting firm had already distanced itself from her, and whispers about the incident were spreading through her professional circles. The fall from grace was swift and absolute. Elena made her way to the exit door, pausing just before stepping into the jet bridge. She turned to face the small group of passengers who had gathered around her seat, their eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity, respect, and hope. "I want to leave you with this thought," Elena began, her voice carrying clearly through the cabin. "Every interaction we have is a choice. Every day, we decide whether to see people as individuals or as representatives of some group or stereotype. We choose whether to speak up when we witness discrimination or to stay silent because it feels easier." She looked directly at the passengers who had supported Diana earlier in the flight. "You choose whether to examine your own biases or to assume your first instincts are always right." Turning to those who had stood by her, she added, "And you choose whether to use your voice only when it is safe and convenient or when it is truly needed." The group nodded, some with tears in their eyes, others with quiet determination. Elena stepped off the plane but paused once more, pulling out her phone. She opened her LinkedIn app and posted a simple message that resonated far beyond the walls of the airplane. "Today, I was reminded that the seat you tried to deny someone might belong to your future boss. More importantly, every person deserves dignity regardless of who their boss turns out to be. Choose better. Choose dignity. Choose justice." Within moments, the post began to circulate rapidly, shared by thousands across professional and social networks. Comments poured in from individuals expressing gratitude, solidarity, and calls for systemic change. 6 months later, the impact of that day was still palpable. Diana Whitman remained unemployed, her name synonymous with unconscious bias in corporate training materials across multiple industries. The consequences she faced served as a cautionary tale about the cost of assumptions and prejudice. Lisa Monroe, who had been terminated by airline XYZ, found a new path with a smaller regional airline. She became one of their most effective diversity trainers, using her experience as a powerful lesson on the importance of awareness and change. The Asian American couple who had supported Elena became prominent advocates for bystander intervention training in corporate settings. They often spoke at conferences, sharing their story and urging others to move from allyship in theory to action in practice. Elena continued to fly commercial, usually in seat 4A, watching and learning. Occasionally, she was surprised by the small shifts in attitude. She noticed a glance of respect, a quiet gesture of inclusion. She understood that change was a process, built one conversation, one choice, one moment at a time. In interviews following the incident, Elena often shared the lesson she hoped others would carry forward. This isn't about revenge. It's about revelation, revealing the systems and assumptions that allow discrimination to flourish and choosing to build something better in their place. Her words echoed the quiet power she embodied, the power of resilience, dignity, and deliberate change. As the city of Atlanta spread out beneath her on subsequent flights, Elena felt a deep sense of responsibility. Her journey was far from over, but the path was clear. The seat you try to deny someone today might belong to your future boss tomorrow. But more importantly, it belongs to a human being today. And that, she believed, was reason enough to choose dignity, justice, and better every single day. Elena Carter's story reminds us that every person deserves respect and dignity, regardless of who they are or where they come from. Her courage in the face of discrimination is both a beacon of hope and a sharp indictment of the biases still ingrained in our society. This isn't just about one woman's fight. It's about the countless unseen battles millions face daily, and the urgent need for all of us to choose empathy over judgment, courage over silence. Let this story inspire you to challenge prejudice whenever you encounter it, to speak up for those who can't, and to reflect honestly on your own assumptions. Change doesn't happen in isolation. It begins with moments of discomfort, conversations like this, and the courage to be better. If Elena's journey moved you, please like this video, share it with friends and family, and subscribe to our channel. We're dedicated to bringing you stories that inspire, provoke thought, and fuel change. Stay tuned for more powerful stories that reveal the truth behind the headlines and the strength of the human spirit. Together, we can choose dignity, justice, and kindness, one story at a time.